He commanded the largest army Europe had ever seen. One decision would end it and reshape the world that came after. By 1811, Napoleon Bonaparte controlled more of continental Europe than any man before him. Kingdoms bent to his will. His Continental System choked Britain's trade, binding ally and enemy alike into one vast blockade. But in the east, Tsar Alexander I was pulling away. Russian ports reopened to British ships. Grain and timber moved again, blockade or no blockade. To Napoleon, this was not a policy dispute. It was defiance. And defiance, in his empire, had only ever been answered one way. Within months, he began assembling the largest invasion force the continent had ever witnessed. Over 500,000 men, drawn from every corner of his empire, aimed squarely at Russia. In June of 1812, the Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. It was by far the largest force ever assembled for a single campaign, more than 600,000 soldiers drawn from a dozen nations under Napoleon's banner. He expected what had worked everywhere else: a fast, decisive battle, a quick surrender, a favorable peace. Russia had other plans. Rather than meet Napoleon head-on, Russian commanders ordered a retreat, but not an empty one. Fields were burned, bridges destroyed, towns abandoned and stripped bare before the French could reach them. For an army built to live off the land it conquered, this was its first real wound. Every mile forward stretched supply lines thinner, and the promised quick victory kept receding just out of reach. By September, the two armies finally collided outside the small town of Borodino. What followed was the single bloodiest day of the entire Napoleonic era. Tens of thousands of casualties on both sides in a single day of fighting. Napoleon technically held the field when the smoke cleared, but the decisive victory he needed never came. The Russian army withdrew largely intact, and the road to Moscow lay open. A week later, Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting what every conquered capital had given him before: a delegation, the keys to the city, terms to dictate. Instead, he found it almost empty. Within days, fires broke out across the city, and much of Moscow burned to the ground around the army that had come to claim it. Napoleon waited. Surely, he believed, the Tsar would come asking for peace. 5 weeks passed inside the ruined city. No offer ever arrived. By mid-October, with no peace and winter closing in, Napoleon gave the order to withdraw. What began as a retreat became one of the most catastrophic marches in military history. Temperatures collapsed. Supplies had long since run out. And at the Berezina River, the retreating army was caught and cut apart while attempting to cross under fire. Of the 600,000 men who had crossed into Russia only months before, only a small fraction would make it out. A myth Napoleon had built his empire on, that he could not be beaten, did not survive the retreat from Russia. Rival powers across Europe, who had bent to him for over a decade, saw the opening they had waited years for. Within 2 years, the coalition that had once bowed to Napoleon forced him from power entirely. The invasion meant to punish one act of defiance ended up costing him everything he had built. Napoleon's story didn't end in the Russian snow. 2 years later, he'd attempt one final gamble to take it all back. That's next.